The Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. The ranking member, Mr. Connolly, will be coming shortly, so when he comes, we'll allow him to go ahead and do his opening statement. Today, through the United States Postal Service, it is often cheaper to ship a small package from China than to ship that same package within the United States. Intuitively, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and so the nearest coast of China is more than 5,000 miles away from the United States across a very large body of water. A simple search of any one of a dozen or more websites helps to illustrate the issue. In searching this topic, the committee staff found numerous examples where small, lightweight goods from China could be purchased and delivered and shipped with shipping included at unbelievable prices, such as 99 cents for a stylus pen or $1.58 for lipstick. Prices like these cause the Postal Service to lose money on at least some of its international mail. And in fact, the Postal Service lost some $75 million on inbound international mail last year alone. However, this loss is not necessarily the Postal Service's fault. International mail rates are largely governed by a treaty drafted through the Universal Postal Union, a United Nations organization with over 192 member countries. This treaty covers the establishment of what they call terminal dues, or the amount of money that one post gives to another post for the final delivery of that international mail. Every 4 years, the UPU negotiates a new treaty, the most recent of which will run through 2018. And the stated goal of these negotiations is to eventually create a system that accurately reflects the cost of final delivery in each country. Under the current treaty, countries are generally classified as either target or transition. Target group members are typically the more industrialized countries, and transition groups members are usually more developing countries. Now, while the terminal dues rates between target countries are somewhat reflective of delivery costs, rates for mail from transition companies to target countries are not. This problem is exacerbated by the fact that the classification system for countries is far from perfect. Most notably, China is included in the same group as Libya, Kazakhstan, and others, making it eligible for higher preferential rates. To help combat terminal dues problems, the Postal Service is authorized to seek out bilateral agreements with countries to secure rates above the terminal dues level. However, in most cases, the Postal Service has little leverage with the transition countries to secure better rates through these added services like parcel tracking. As one example, in 2012, mail sent under a bilateral agreement with China only reduced Postal Service costs by 3% compared to the terminal dues rate. All of this has left thousands of American small businesses at a competitive disadvantage against foreign competition. Not because of the price of the goods or the labor or anything else, but because of the size of the hidden shipping subsidies. With that in mind, the questions become, how can we improve this situation? Which brings us to the panel that is here before us today. Before us, we have key representatives from a wide array of interested parties, including the State Department, the Postal Service, the Postal Regulatory Commission, international shippers, and the domestic retail industry, all of whom have a clear stake in the long-term future of terminal dues system. I look forward in hearing from all of you, all of the witnesses, about our current situation and how it came about and what we can do to eliminate these, what I would say, anti-competitive trade distortions as quickly as possible. As a previous small business guy, the last thing I want to do is take my home field advantage and feel like I have a disadvantage because someone can ship it at a much cheaper cost from 5,000 miles away. So specifically, I hope the witnesses will share their ideas about how we can make the Universal Postal Union more transparent, how to reduce the amount of information on international mailing that is considered commercially sensitive and not available to the public, and how to improve the overall fair competition for international package delivery. As I said earlier, we will recognize the ranking member when he gets here. I'd like to thank each one of you. I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. We will now recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome the Honorable Robert Tudd, Acting Chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission. It's good to see you again. Mr. Robert Fauché, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of International Organization Affairs at the U.S. State Department. Mr. Randy Miskanik, is that close enough? All right, Acting Chief Information Officer and Executive Vice President at the U.S. Postal Service. Ms. Nancy Sparks, Managing Director of the Regulatory Affairs at FedEx. Mr. Paul Meisner, Vice President of Global Public Policy at Amazon. And Mr. David Williams, Inspector General of the U.S. Postal Service. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that all witnesses be sworn in before they testify, so if you would please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and you may be seated. So I would, in order to allow enough time for discussion, I would ask that your oral testimony be limited to 5 minutes. However, your entire written statement will be made part of the record. And so I will go ahead and go with our first witness, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. I'm pleased to testify before you today. The defining feature of the Postal Regulatory Commission's responsibilities in current law is that they exist within the larger context of U.S. membership in the Universal Postal Union, UPU, where terminal dues are negotiated as part of a complex process, which the Chairman outlined in detail in his opening statement. The current negotiating framework, established by the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act of 2006, builds upon landmark 1998 legislation that transferred responsibility for international postal policy from the Postal Service to the Secretary of State. The 2006 law established clear policy for the U.S. to, among other goals, quote, promote and encourage unrestricted and undistorted competition in the provision of international postal services and other international delivery services, end quote. The law also established a new role for the Commission by directing the Secretary of State to request and the Commission to provide views on the consistency of terminal dues proposals with domestic rate regulation. The most recent view stated that, quote, the Commission continues to adhere to the position that the U.S. government should actively promote terminal dues rates in the UPU that are closely aligned with domestic postage rates and provide sufficient cost coverage to handle, transport, and deliver inbound international mail for the Postal Service. Terminal dues rates are available only to designated operators. The Commission encourages the Department of State to move the UPU to adopt a terminal dues system that is more cost-based, country-specific, and just and reasonable, end quote. The 2012 UPU Congress enacted terminal dues that are increasing the Postal Service's rates for most industrialized countries by roughly 13% annually from 2014 to 2017. The Commission has found that these continued terminal dues increases, if accompanied by cost containment, should have a positive effect on inbound letter post revenue and cost coverage. In addition, as the Commission's understanding of the UPU terminals dues system grew, it realized that no one had analyzed the wider effects of the terminal dues system through the lens of economic theory. Therefore, last year, the Commission contracted with Copenhagen Economics to address terminal dues from this perspective. The principal findings of the Copenhagen Economics report are detailed in my written testimony, but overall, the report found that terminal dues, as currently structured, create a variety of distortions to competition, demand, trade flows, and postal operators' costs. 15 years ago, in March 2000, this committee held a very similar hearing on international postal policy. I attended the hearing in my capacity as subcommittee staff director, chaired by former Representative John McHugh, to whom I also served as Chief of Staff. The hearing followed the 1999 UPU Congress, which committed to a goal of achieving a cost-based terminal dues system by 2005. There have been 3 additional UPU Congresses since, but the goal of the 1999 UPU Congress to achieve cost-based terminal dues by 2005 has not been realized. I think the conclusion is that progress on terminal dues has been glacial since the previous subcommittee hearing 15 years ago. Indeed, a decade and a half later, the Commission stated in a report issued less than 3 months ago, quote, "The Commission recognizes that the pricing regime for the inbound letter post product, based upon the current UPU formula, results in non-compensatory terminal dues rates. As a result, domestic mailers continue to subsidize the entry of inbound letter posts by foreign mailers who use the same postal infrastructure but bear none of the burden of contributing to its institutional cost," end quote. At that hearing 15 years ago, the Commission described the exact same situation. Last September, the private sector submitted 3 terminal dues proposals to the State Department's Federal Advisory Committee. The Commission suggests that the Advisory Committee's recently approved Subcommittee on Terminal Dues carefully examine these proposals and the Copenhagen Economics Report. That report's key solution, similar prices for similar services, regardless of country of origin or status as private or public operator, shows that terminal dues do not have to remain an intractable problem. On behalf of my fellow commissioners and the entire hardworking agency staff, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your service. Mr. Fouché.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the Department of State's role in international postal matters. For 140 years, the Universal Postal Union has provided the framework for the international exchange of mail. The United States' participation in the Universal Postal Union is led by the Department of State, which is responsible for the formulation, coordination, and oversight of foreign policy related to international postal services. In discharging these responsibilities, the Department of State works closely with the Postal Regulatory Commission, the United States Postal Service, and other concerned government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Commerce, and the Office of the United States Trade Representative. We also seek advice from the International Postal and Delivery Services Advisory Committee, which brings together key private sector and government stakeholders. In 2012, the International Postal and Delivery Services Advisory Committee helped to formulate the 2013 to 2016 United States Strategic Plan for the Universal Postal Union. This plan identified 5 priorities with regard to the terminal dues system. These priorities included supporting the fundamental principle of market-oriented, cost-based, country-specific terminal dues. These priorities also included further refining the methodology of terminal dues pricing model to produce rates that more closely reflect costs, and also including more member states in the target terminal dues system. Terminal dues rates are established in the UPU Convention, as you mentioned. This convention is adopted by the Congress of the Universal Postal Union every 4 years. It establishes universally applicable rules for the provision of international postal services. The next Congress of the Universal Postal Union will take place in Istanbul in 2016. The Department of State provides the head of the U.S. delegation to these Congresses, and it also initiates the Circular 175 process to authorize negotiations. The State Department also coordinates the production of position papers that are cleared through an interagency process. In addition to this interagency coordination, the Department of State also solicits the views of the Postal Regulatory Commission on the consistency of the proposals that are before the Congress that could establish a rate or classification for any market-dominant product with the regulatory standards and criteria established by the Postal Regulatory Commission. The State Department also ensures that the formulation of United States positions is informed by stakeholder input, principally through the International Postal and Delivery Services Advisory Committee, which the Department of State convenes when there are issues to consider and before all major Universal Postal Union meetings. Finally, it is important to understand that the U.S. delegation to a Congress of the Universal Postal Union has sometimes included private sector advisors, whose knowledge and perspectives have proven to be invaluable. The United States is a member of the Postal Operations Council and the Council of Administration at the Universal Postal Union. These two bodies have the responsibility of preparing the terminal dues proposals for the next Universal Postal Convention. The State Department has designated the Postal Regulatory Commission and the Postal Service as co-leads for the U.S. participation in the formulation of these proposals. The State Department, however, will retain final authority for determining the U.S. positions. The focus of the current work in the Postal Operations Council is to finalize two terminal dues pricing model options that would incorporate the differences in delivery costs associated with mail items of different shapes. So, for example, handling costs are higher for a box than for an envelope. We strongly support this effort, which advances our goal of further refining the pricing model to produce terminal dues rates that more closely reflect costs to postal service providers. In addition, there is a potentially far-reaching initiative to modernize the Universal Postal Union's physical services portfolio, potentially integrating letter posts and parcel posts, which would have significant implications for terminal dues. Let me conclude with a further note on stakeholder consultation. At the State Department's request, a Postal Service official briefed the International Postal and Delivery Services Advisory Committee on the state of play in terminal dues work at the Postal Operations Council at the committee's most recent meeting on February 13. The Advisory Committee had two lengthy discussions on terminal dues issues in the past year, and these discussions focused on the proposals presented by Advisory Committee members representing the commercial express delivery industry, with the objective of having the United States propose them at the 2016 Istanbul Conference. The Advisory Committee took no action on these proposals, but it recommended instead that a subcommittee be formed to facilitate a more detailed examination of the terminal dues issues. The State Department accepted this recommendation and has authorized the establishment of a subcommittee for this purpose, which should be meeting in the next few weeks. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for this opportunity to describe the role of the Department of State in international postal matters, including the process of establishing terminal dues, and to outline the U.S. goals in this process. I would be happy to answer any questions members of the committee have on these topics or on other matters related to terminal dues or the Universal Postal Union or international postal and delivery services in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fauché. Before we go on to you, Mr. Miskanik, I'm going to recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from the 11th District of Virginia, Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding today's hearing to examine international postal policy, particularly the current terminal dues rate system. We have an excellent panel of witnesses before us, and indeed I believe it was PRC Chairman Taub who was the catalyst behind the last hearing held to examine the international postal system back in March of 2000. Each witness represents a key entity with expertise and important insights on how we can work together to strengthen the U.S. strategic approach to future negotiations. I look forward to an in-depth conversation today to explore how our nation can work to level the playing field for American small businesses and, in the process, enhance global competition in e-commerce markets to benefit consumers at home and abroad. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, the UPU is the global organization through which the international community establishes treaties governing complex global mail issues, such as setting appropriate terminal dues rates every 4 years. Terminal dues are meant to cover the domestic costs of handling, transporting, and delivering mail originating abroad, while ensuring that rates are set in a progressive fashion to ensure that all UPU countries participate in the system. The concept of the terminal dues system is well intended. Indeed, the world needs a mechanism in place to facilitate global mail exchanges. However, there appear to be serious shortcomings in the current system that may be harming American business interests. For example, recent audits by the U.S. Postal Service's Inspector General found that terminal dues do not cover the Postal Service's actual costs for handling, transporting, and delivering letter post items from abroad. Further, I'm concerned that the significant imbalance between our nation's domestic shipping rates and the incredibly low international shipping rates we charge so-called transitional countries to export goods into our country may be providing an artificial and unfair competitive advantage to foreign retailers, and that harms U.S. small businesses. According to the Postal Regulatory Commission, the current terminal dues rate may distort competition and artificially increase demand for products from foreign vendors who benefit from these low transitional country rates. The shipping of e-packets, which weigh up to 4.4 pounds and contain tracking and delivering features from China to the United States, have increased by 182% just from 2011 to 2012, according to the report by Postal Vision 2020. While this increase is partially a result of technological advancements that have spurred greater utilization of e-commerce marketplaces, it's highly likely that the unfair competitive advantage provided by the low terminal dues is also a major driver of this dramatic increase. American small businesses simply want a level playing field on which to compete with foreign retailers, many of whom are formidable business competitors, even absent the artificial terminal dues pricing advantage they get. In addition, private carriers are struggling to compete with carriers who have access to terminal dues, and the Postal Service continues to lose money on foreign shipping costs as foreign posts profit. The bottom line is that we are here this afternoon to ensure that there's a fair and equitable global marketplace and that American businesses have a fair opportunity to compete on a level playing field in the digital age. The one country, one vote structure of the UPU does not allow change to happen at a rapid pace. That's why it's essential for government agencies and private entities to do everything in their power to protect American interests. According to Title 39, Section 407, the State Department's role is to, quote, promote and encourage unrestricted and undistorted competition in the provision of international postal services and other international delivery service, unquote. This is crucial to ensuring the success of American business and ultimately the American economy. I look forward to hearing how the State Department in particular has carried out this responsibility. I'd also like to hear the PRC's view on the most pressing issues with the current system and its proposals and how it can be improved to facilitate robust but fair competition. From our private carriers and e-commerce marketplace providers, I'd like to gain an understanding of how businesses have been affected by these dues, particularly our nation's community of small e-retailers. So I think this is an important hearing. And, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding it and look forward to the testimony, and thank you for allowing me to interject at this point.
Thank you for your comments. And so now we'll go and recognize you, Mr. Muskanek, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Randy Muskanek, and I'm the Acting Chief Information Officer and Executive Vice President for the Postal Service. I previously served at the Universal Postal Union in Bern, Switzerland for approximately 3 years. I was also a member of the U.S. delegation for the 2012 UPU Congress in Doha. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the UPU terminal dues system. The UPU is a specialized UN agency that sets the terms for how the world's postal operators exchange international mail. The organization establishes terminal dues rates and is the primary forum for cooperation among postal operators. The United States is a member of the UPU and exchanges mail globally in accordance with its acts. The State Department, the Postal Service, the PRC, and representatives of the broader postal industry are key UPU stakeholders. By law, the State Department is the lead representative of the U.S. government to the UPU. The Postal Service is designated to fulfill the obligation of the UPU Acts, which includes exchanging international mail with more than 200 countries and territories. International mail accounts for 4% of our revenue and 1% of our annual total volume. Industry representatives, including FedEx, UPS, and DHL, directly participate in the State Department's Advisory Committee on International Postal and Delivery Services. A subcommittee will be forming to facilitate a more detailed examination of terminal dues, which will be an appropriate venue for greater stakeholder engagement. The UPU Congress, which convenes every 4 years, provides the forum for member countries to establish policies and regulations for the global postal sector. Each of the 192 member countries is entitled to 1 vote on proposals introduced to the Congress, including those involving terminal dues. Terminal dues are paid and received for the delivery of letters, flats, and small packages weighing up to 4.4 pounds. The rates, which are set by the UPU and assessed against the originating post, are intended to cover processing and delivery costs for inbound international mail. Terminal dues rates are based on whether a country is classified as target or transition, as determined by its stage of development. Target country terminal dues are based on country-specific rates, which is currently 70% of domestic postage rates. Transition countries pay terminal dues rates that are based primarily on lower worldwide average costs. The 2012 Doha Congress established a new formula to produce terminal dues that are closer to actual costs, which will result in increases for both the target and transition countries. While this is a favorable development, the changes will take 4 years to be fully implemented from the January 2014 effective date, and cost coverage may remain under 100%. We have long made the argument that inbound letter post cost coverage for a country like the United States must be improved. The terminal dues system is designed to serve multiple competing objectives, including support for developing countries. As such, it is not a system suitable for participation by both public and private operators, the latter of which differ in several ways from universal service providers. Private operators are not encumbered by universal service obligations and are free to target only the most lucrative markets. Additionally, they are able to offer service to or from a country without having to carry reverse traffic at a loss. Going forward, the Postal Service is advocating for shape-based pricing to better achieve cost. It is anticipated that the 2016 Istanbul Congress will adopt a terminal due structure that is more closely related to the cost of processing and delivering different shapes of mail. As an alternative to UPU terminal dues, the Postal Service can enter into bilateral agreements with foreign postal operators that include negotiated rates for some or all inbound letter post items. Negotiated rates are designed to improve the overall cost coverage and improve efficiencies. Proposed inbound bilateral agreements must be filed at the PRC for review and approval. While the Postal Service may be better served by negotiating terms independently with certain countries, it would be impractical to negotiate, sign, and file at the PRC a separate bilateral agreement with each UPU designated operator. In many cases, foreign postal operators are not willing to negotiate bilateral agreements, as doing so would require paying a rate higher than UPU terminal dues. When the Postal Service negotiates with foreign postal operators, there is little bargaining room to increase cost coverage because the current UPU terminal dues structure provides the base of the negotiating position. The Postal Service continues to encourage the UPU and State Department to support the principle of cost-based, country-specific terminal dues and advocates for positions that move toward better cost coverage for all inbound UPU mail flows. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome any questions that you and the committee members may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Sparks will recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm here today on behalf of FedEx Express and our 300,000 team members in the United States and around the world. With your permission, I would like to submit my full statement for the record and just provide a brief overview now.
Without objection.
I first would like to thank you, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the Subcommittee on Government Operations for convening this hearing on international postal and delivery services. It is extremely timely, given the upcoming Universal Postal Union Congress in 2016. The topic of international postal policy often feels obscure and impenetrable, but it is important for the U.S. economy. Today, 3 of the top 5 players in the global parcel delivery market are U.S. entities: FedEx, UPS, and the United States Postal Service. Collectively, we employ more than 1 million Americans. We connect sellers and buyers and ordinary individuals across the globe, and we are the conduit for the booming international e-commerce trade. The next UPU Congress will establish the rules until 2022. The time for promoting long-needed reforms at the UPU is getting very short. The legal framework of the UPU is outdated and ill-equipped to handle today's radically changing market. It produces significant regulatory challenges which adversely affect FedEx and the United States. The world's post offices, including the Postal Service, are experiencing massive changes due to the steep decline in letters and documents. They are attempting to change their focus onto package delivery services, especially e-commerce services. Large international postal companies like Royal Mail, China Post, and La Poste of France are now major logistics companies. For private carriers like FedEx and UPS, e-commerce services are a natural extension of long-established global express networks. International package delivery has become a big and highly competitive business. As you quoted, the Congress defined the policy of the United States towards this dynamic market in the 2006 PIEA, that is, to promote and encourage unrestricted and undistorted competition in the provision of international postal and other international delivery services. This declaration rests on two insights. First, international postal and delivery services now comprise a single market. Second, competition should be the norm. In the package segment in particular, there is no room for monopoly and no entitlement to a special position for any actor. Congress had it right in 2006. Promoting competition on the international stage may be hard work, but it is necessary to foster better and more innovative services which will support international commerce in the 21st century. The PIEA prescribed the right goals and standards for U.S. participation in the UPU. Viewed through the lens of the PIEA, however, there are three fundamental problems with the way the UPU interacts with the global parcels market. It looks like I'm probably only going to have time to talk about one of them, and that's the terminal dues system. The UPU has established a system of economically distortive and anti-competitive delivery rates for international postal packages. These delivery rates are exclusively available to post offices. They are not cost-based, as you've heard. They are fixed by agreement among posts. The gist of this system is that posts give each other large discounts off the domestic postage rates they charge their own citizens. Discounts are extra deep, as we've heard, for developing countries, even though some like China, Singapore, and Hong Kong are powerhouses in international e-commerce. When the Postal Service delivers goods from Asia at deeply discounted prices, the losers are U.S. businesses who are placed at a competitive disadvantage. Private carriers like FedEx are affected as well. We have identified two other issues in our written testimony, one dealing with customs parity and the other dealing with the need for institutional reform at the UPU. I appreciate the time that you've given us today and hope that you will find our written statement useful.
Thank you, Ms. Sparks, and I must admit you're one of the few in Washington, D.C. that actually pays attention to the clock, and I appreciate that. Mr. Meisner, I'll come to you.
The pressure is on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Meisner, and I am Amazon.com's Vice President for Global Public Policy. Thank you for having me. Under international postal agreements, the United States Postal Service charges much lower rates for delivering foreign shipments from transfer points in the United States to recipients in the United States than the USPS charges for handling comparable wholly domestic shipments between the same U.S. points. This disparity discriminates against American businesses shipping domestically. To allow fair competition in shipping to U.S. consumers and equitable treatment of American businesses, the international agreements must be reformed. Thank you for your attention to this important topic, for holding this hearing, and for inviting me. Amazon operates a global e-commerce business, and we strive to be Earth's most customer-centric company. In the context of shipping, our key customer sets are consumers, that is buyers, as well as sellers. Our consumer customers, we offer low prices, vast selection, and convenience. And for our seller customers, our marketplace e-commerce platform allows millions of sellers that are mostly small businesses and individuals to sell through Amazon's websites. Today, more than 40% of Amazon's total unit sales are by these third-party sellers. Delivery is a very important part of the customer experience at Amazon, and accordingly, we maintain strong ties to postal operators around the world, including the USPS and China Post. But we believe that two problematic compensation arrangements between them need to be reformed to promote fair competition in shipping to American consumers. There has been considerable discussion about whether these agreements adversely affect the financial health of the USPS, as its Office of Inspector General concluded in a 2014 white paper. It is not difficult to see that as a result of the compensation imbalance, businesses in China end up paying less for delivery in the United States than American businesses end up paying for delivery in China. But another serious problem caused by these agreements is less well known and maybe less obvious. As an indirect result of the arrangements between China Post and the USPS, under which China Post underpays the USPS for lightweight deliveries within the United States, American businesses of all sizes end up paying more than Chinese companies for deliveries to American consumers. In other words, because U.S. domestic delivery rates exceed international terminal rates here, Chinese companies end up getting a better deal from the USPS than American businesses. Amazingly, when combined with extremely low bulk shipping rates from China to U.S. transfer points, shipments from China to points throughout the United States are often cheaper than shipments entirely within the United States. The resulting competitive disadvantage to American businesses of all sizes is unfair as it is illogical. For example, at today's rates, shipping a 100-gram parcel to Fairfax, Virginia would cost a small business in Marion, North Carolina at least $1.94 at a distance of 340 miles, but would cost a company in Shanghai only $1.12 at a distance of 7,000 miles. Similarly, shipping a 1-pound parcel to New York City would cost nearly $6 from Grenville, South Carolina, but only $3.66 from Beijing. At high volumes, especially for low-priced items, such dramatic shipping cost differences can make or break a small e-commerce business. The current international agreements that ultimately discriminate against American domestic shippers of all sizes should be reformed. Ideally, international termination compensation rates would rise, approaching the domestic rates of postage, and at least in theory, then both rates could meet at a point of parity less than the current domestic rate. That is, increases in terminal rates could potentially allow a revenue-neutral reduction in domestic delivery rates, which would benefit even more Americans. This reformation would not give an advantage to American sellers over foreign-based sellers. Rather, it would merely level the playing field on which they compete. In particular, the United States has a special relationship with China. Surely, with all the strong and growing ties between our nations, we can resolve the anachronistic imbalance which, if it ever made sense for China-based sellers to have a shipping price advantage within the United States over U.S.-based sellers, it makes no sense now, given the strong trading position that China already enjoys. In conclusion, existing international agreements offer foreign-based companies much cheaper mail service in the United States than the USPS offers to American seller businesses for domestic shipments. For the sake of both effective competition in shipping and fairness to American seller businesses, the UPU Terminal Delivery Compensation System and current bilateral agreements between the USPS and key foreign postal operators such as China Post must be reformed. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
You rose to the occasion, Mr. Meisner. I will say it is not without recognition by me or the ranking member that your example was from my district to his district. It's
purely coincidental.
Purely coincidental. I appreciate it. Mr. Williams will recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss this issue. When someone mails a letter or parcel to another country, the sending post receives the postage, but then compensates the destination post for its processing and delivery. Compensation rates, called terminal dues, are negotiated among 192 countries at the Universal Postal Union every 4 years. Each nation gets 1 vote. Countries are also free to enter into their own customized bilateral agreements for particular mail flows. The U.S. Postal Service has bilateral agreements with Canada Post and China Post and others. Historically, inbound terminal dues rates have not covered costs for the U.S. Postal Service and many other posts. Last year, the Postal Service lost $75 million delivering inbound international mail. Other nations also lose money processing mail for inadequate terminal dues rates. The explosion of e-commerce is creating new areas of concern. The number of small parcels sent to the United States from China has greatly increased. The Postal Service loses money delivering each of these parcels, and China Post can send them at lower rates than even businesses located here in the United States. In 2012, for example, a typical small parcel, the first-class rate for U.S. businesses was more than $1 higher than the rate China Post paid under terminal dues. It's unclear how much China Post charges its own large customers. To respond to parcel growth and to better cover costs, the Postal Service created the e-Packet product in a bilateral agreement with China Post. E-Packets are small parcels that receive delivery tracking. In return, China Post pays higher rates than terminal dues. In a recent audit, we found that the Postal Service received 27 million e-packets from China Post in the fiscal year 2012. Each packet lost $1.10 on average, which was only a negligible improvement of 5 cents compared to the loss under terminal dues. In response, the Postal Service explained that it was negotiating a better deal, but it also made clear that the substantial rate increases could cause China Post to revert to low UPU terminal dues rates, which treat China as a developing nation in need of price supports. The UPU is gradually making changes to terminal dues, although progress has been slow. A 2012 decision will move China and several other significant economies to the lowest target category for industrialized countries in 2016. However, this will not result in any significant increase in terminal dues until 2018. Any damage to U.S. businesses will likely have occurred by then. More beneficially for the Postal Service, terminal dues rates it receives from industrialized countries are increasing 13% a year between 2014 and 2017. This will bring the Postal Service significant additional revenue, but make it harder than ever for British or German goods to compete with Chinese products sold here. The UPU's mission is as relevant as when the institution was created. But like many enterprises, the UPU system has greatly been disrupted by globalization and the digital age. The process is not agile or responsive even to great changes in commerce and economics. It can take years to catch up to changing economic realities. Many nations have made significant economic progress, but the process of bringing their rates in line with terminal dues paid by other developed countries has been slow, and nations still vote on the size and the time frame of terminal dues increases. The existence of low terminal dues rates as a default also hampers nations in their ability to negotiate fair agreements. The UPU system involves nation-states providing universal service, but excludes private sector carriers whose importance has grown with the rise of e-commerce. Gaps in real mail processing costs and terminal dues are encouraging exploitative new industries that take advantage of the low terminal dues and undermine national posts. An unintended consequence of terminal dues is that the system picks winners and losers and undermines efficient market forces. In the United States, China has an unfair edge over U.S. businesses. These distortions are even greater in other industrialized countries. Removing market distortions and ensuring the ability to is taking on new importance with the growth of e-commerce and globalization. My office wants to do additional work in this area, and we would like to work with your staffs to include issues brought out today in that body of work. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. William. I thank all of you for your testimony. I must confess that when I first heard about this particular issue, it was not on the top of my bucket list in terms of issues to address, but I will say thank you for your illuminating testimony. We're going to go for a series of questions, and I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, for 5 minutes for a round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fauché, are terminal dues rates made public?
I believe, and I could be corrected here, but I believe they are made public as part of the UPU's records.
So do small businesses have access to this?
Again, if those records are made public, they would have access to those. Yes, they would.
Okay, thank you.
And I could ask my colleagues to correct me if I'm incorrect, if I have this wrong.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's correct. Ms. Sparks, how is your company specifically impacted by terminal dues rates?
Well, I would say that there are probably two different ways that we're affected. First of all, we look at the global competition when we're talking about delivery services. So we not only compete with UPS and with the United States Postal Service, but we compete offshore with Royal Mail, with China Post. And so what's happened with the terminal dues system is that they have set up what I refer to as an exclusive club where they offer each other deep discounts, but they don't offer them to us. So it's very difficult for us to get into those markets with a similarly priced e-commerce product. So it's difficult to compete.
So it's not just a problem in the United States where we've got disparity in people paying higher rates or lower rates and disconnected from the actual cost. It's a problem in other countries where they're...
Absolutely. And in fact, if you talk to regulators in other countries, regulators in Europe, for example, they will tell you that their countries are similarly being flooded with these low postal rate, what's the right term? Low postal charged packages.
So do you have access to those rates overseas?
No, we wouldn't have access to any rates. We would have access to the same rates that a domestic shipper, for instance, a German shipper would get in Germany.
So they're public here in the U.S. and transparent, but not overseas?
No, I'm sorry. I thought you meant access like we could use them. We would get the benefit of them. No, the rates are published after the UPU rates. What they charge each other are published after the Congress once they've been decided upon. Unless there's a bilateral agreement in place, like the one that the United States has with China, that is not made public. We do not know what the United States and China are charging each other right now.
All right. My next question is for Mr. Meisner. Who are the winners and losers in the current terminal dues system?
Well, the clear losers are American businesses selling to American consumers, and these are many of the sellers through our website. The clear winners are foreign sellers selling to American consumers. They get a terrific benefit. Overall, it's mostly just this distortion among our seller customers that has been so frustrating to us. It's a completely unnecessary and illogical distortion that one set of sellers would get a benefit from the USPS that another set of sellers does not.
So it seems like there's clearly a problem here, and Mr. Chairman, I had no idea that this disparity existed either until you called this hearing. So the next chance to fix this, is this correct, Mr. Miskanic, is in 2016 at the next UPU Congress where they're going to discuss and set these rates, or is there a chance before then?
That's correct. That the next chance to fix this is 2016 at the Istanbul Congress.
And I think you mentioned in your testimony, or maybe it was somebody else, there will be another committee that's established to represent stakeholders in the United States, or did you allude to something about getting more input?
That's correct, Representative Massey. There's a subcommittee formed by the State Department specifically to address this issue and work on proposals moving forward in anticipation of the 2016 Istanbul Congress.
So is the State Department optimistic we can address this in 2016? Because these rates are going to be set until 2021 at this next chance. We don't want to miss it.
Yeah, I would say the State Department is very optimistic that we'll be able to address this problem in 2016, just as it was addressed in 2012. We're going to make progress on this problem. We might not solve it completely, however, but we're going to continue to try to move the terminal dues rates as close to the cost basis as possible. That is our goal for 2016.
Thank you very much. I yield back my remaining 2 seconds.
I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for conducting this hearing. I want to talk to Mr. Foucher and Mr. Topp, and I'd like to discuss the role of the State Department and the Postal Regulatory Commission in shaping international mail policy. The State Department has the responsibility to coordinate with other agencies as appropriate, and in particular should give full consideration to the authority vested by law or executive order in the PRC. Is that right, Mr. Foucher?
That's absolutely correct.
And Section 407 states, before concluding any treaty, convention, or amendment that establishes a rate or classification, the Secretary of State shall request the PRC to submit its views on whether such rate or classification is consistent with the standards and criteria established by the Commission. Is it fair to say that the State Department uses the PRC as a tool to evaluate the proposals?
We definitely see the Postal Regulatory Commission as a very important colleague and collaborator on all these things. We seek their advice, we seek their views on these questions to the greatest extent possible because they have the expertise in this area.
And once the State Department receives the recommendation, does the State Department, is it required to follow it?
I don't know, I would say required. I think in almost every case that I can think of, we have tried to follow what the PRC has recommended to do. Of course, we still have our foreign policy prerogatives that we must follow also, but I can't think of a single case that I'm aware of where we have not followed a PRC recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. And it is my understanding that the U.S. Postal Service is not supposed to have involvement in the shaping of international postal policy. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, it's not supposed to have a what?
It's not supposed to have involvement in the shaping of international postal policy.
I'm not aware of that. I would say it's very important for us to understand the U.S. Postal Service and its constraints and the way it's doing business for us to be able to shape international postal policy. They are the designated postal operator under the Universal Postal Union, so it's very important for us to hear their voice and also get their advice on the issues before us.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Mr. Muskanek, would you care to comment on the role of the Postal Service with respect to international postal policy?
Thank you, Representative Clay. Yes, the Postal Service serves as a member on the U.S. delegation to the UPU, and as such, we participate in meetings and forums as the formulation of policy is conducted. As my colleague, Mr. Foucher, has stated, that the State Department has the ultimate role in shaping foreign policy. However, as the designated postal operator and the entity that bears the universal service obligation for the acts of the UPU that we were required to follow, we do have the opportunity to participate and provide input into that policy.
Thank you for that response. And Mr. Taub, it's clear that the State Department relies heavily on the PRC's opinion as to whether these proposals are consistent with the law concerning postal policy. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have a clear statutory role in this process.
And is it true that the PRC reviews every proposal that could potentially have an effect on postal policy that the State Department receives?
Indeed. We have a very small staff and a very limited budget, but we have dedicated staff to this issue, and they go through every proposal to ensure that whether it has a rate or classification implication, and if so, then we go through and assess whether we should be providing a view to the Department of State.
Okay, and then in that process, in addition to making sure that they are consistent with the law, are they making a determination as to how good or bad the proposal is overall?
The specific determination we're making is the specific proposal consistent or inconsistent with the legislative criteria to set market dominant rates in the U.S., which is mainly letters, periodicals. It's not the competitive products. It's a different regulatory regime. So we're looking at, is this specific proposal consistent with the statutory criteria?
Thank you for your response, Mr. Chairman. I finished on time.
Kudos to the gentleman from Missouri for finishing on time. I'm going to recognize the vice chair of this committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm starting on time. Mr. Meisner, to your knowledge, how, if at all, does the State Department take into account the views of American retailers, particularly small businesses, in determining UPU bargaining positions?
Mr. Walberg, thank you. I think it will increase after this hearing, and I thank the committee for holding this hearing because it does focus attention on the need to take into account the effects on American businesses within the United States There was an answer earlier to a question about when the next opportunity is to adjust these disparities, and Mr. Massey had asked this question, and the answer given was with respect to the UPU only. As I pointed out in my written testimony, I think there are opportunities for bilateral negotiations where where the most significant problems arise. And so a negotiation directly with China on this issue, I think, is in order, without waiting for a UPU Congress or the results of that multinational body.
So consultation throughout the process, over time, checking out with the private sector would be helpful.
It's also my responsibility at Amazon to ensure that our ideas are transmitted to the State Department and the Postal Service and others, and so I'm offering them here today, and I will follow up.
Mr. Fauscher, similarly, how much of a voice do American businesses have in the process of developing states' objectives going into UPU Congress?
I've been in this position for almost 2 years now. And throughout all the deliberations we've had on this issue, we've always taken into account the concerns of U.S. businesses and the concerns of U.S. consumers. We welcome U.S. businesses to attend our advisory committee meetings. We look for their representatives in various things. We invite them onto our delegations. They have been totally welcome at all times to make their concerns known to us so that we can take those into account.
Have they followed up with that openness?
Yeah, we constantly have. We have regularly representatives, members on this table who have been members of our delegations representing their interests. That's correct.
Ms. Sparks, what can be done to give more of a voice to American business in this process? We've had the request from one side, we'd like more opportunity. From Mr. Fauscher, yes, they have the opportunity. We're always open to that. Bring us together here.
That's a tall order. Thank you. I think certainly the iPods, which is the funny name of this committee, the International Postal and Delivery Services Committee, is an excellent vehicle. We have found it at times to be difficult because there are very many opinions in the room. We presented a proposal on terminal dues last September, and we were told last week that the subcommittee is now being convened. So these things do not always move as quickly as we would like, and this is why we found the timing of this hearing to be very important, because in UPU time, 2016, September of 2016, is a heartbeat away. So we welcome the continued involvement. I did go to Doha as a private sector advisor to the delegation in the last Congress. I appreciated that opportunity. I would have appreciated it more if I had seen the U.S. proposals before I went.
So you hadn't seen the proposals?
I did not see the U.S. position papers before we went. And in all deference to Mr. Faucher, he was not in this position at that time. So this is a previous group that we were dealing with.
Saved by the appointment time.
Getting U.S. commercial input is a learning process, and I think we are learning, and I think this hearing today provides us with another opportunity for all of us to learn how to participate.
Well, definitely, as with any business, we're talking of milliseconds of need of making decisions, and if you're waiting too long, it's hard to make those key decisions. Mr. Taub, if you'd respond as well to the preceding question of how the businesses can be worked with in a better way in coming up with solutions and agenda.
Sure. Maybe to give a little context, in my written and oral statement, I had described 15 years ago this committee holding a very similar hearing on this issue. That was before the law changed in 2006, but it was shortly after the law had changed for the first time to have the Secretary of State in the lead role, not the Postal Service. The Government Accountability Office testified at that hearing and said, you know what, the State Department really needs to undertake a Federal Advisory Committee process and probably needs to be mandated. 2006 law did that, and so frankly, without that change, I'm not sure we would have seen the structure in place. That structure is in place here now. We are members of that FACA, as it's called. I think as Nancy outlined, it's been a learning process. I would observe that the law did have very specific requirements of the Secretary of State's consultation and involvement with other federal agencies, and yet had the Postal Service in that same law together with all of our postal and delivery sector, both public and private. I do have an observation, having attended the recent FACA meeting in my new role as acting chair, that the Postal Service is at the table in some ways as another executive branch agency. They certainly are, but when it comes to the Title 39 of the U.S. Code and Section 407, there was an intent there to have a better distinction.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me additional time.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman, Ms. Plaskett from the Virgin Islands, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here this afternoon. I wanted to ask some specific questions that may be a little off from specifically what we're talking about. But I live in a district, the United States Virgin Islands, which, for all intents and purposes, by the Postal Service as well as some of the testifiers, is treated as an international postal zone. And I wanted to ask questions specific to that. Mr. Taub, one of the things that, and am I pronouncing your name correctly, sir?
It's Taub, but
Taub. Okay. Mr. Taub, I wanted to ask you with regard to Postal Regulatory Commission, if in fact the Virgin Islands is considered international.
the Virgin Islands is part of the United States, and in terms of the service standards that we're looking at, the Postal Service sets those, and they're supposed to be covering all of the United States itself.
Right. So can you tell me why in the last 5 years residents of the Virgin Islands have been required to fill out customs forms when they send packages from the U.S. Virgin Islands to the United States, to the mainland?
I cannot answer that. Again, we're the regulator, not the operator. Those are operational details that I would suggest the Postal Service itself.
Is anyone able from the Postal Service testifying today be able to tell me why that's been imposed on the people who are U.S. citizens to fill out these forms every time they try and send a package to a relative that is in the mainland?
Representative Plaskett, the completion of customs forms is directed by Customs and Border Protection. Obviously, the Postal Service would not create an undue burden for your constituents, and that would be something best answered.
So we would need to speak with Customs why they're making us at the U.S. Postal Service fill out customs forms.
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't have any control over what happens within the post office.
The Postal Service has no authority over Customs and Border Protection and the processing and the requirement of customs forms.
Okay, so I'll direct my questions to them. The other thing I found interesting in reading the testimony of the people here testifying, Ms. Sparks particularly, as well as Mr. Messina from the private sector, is the discussion about the disparities in competition that's given to businesses outside of the United States and competing with U.S. businesses from the rates that are offered. Ms. Sparks, can you tell me why a package coming from the Virgin Islands is treated as international in terms of the rates that they have to pay, whereas individuals sending the same size package with FedEx from the mainland pays domestic prices?
I'm afraid I can't. I think what you're asking me is why does the Postal Service charge?
No, this is from FedEx.
From FedEx. Well, I would assume, I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Would you?
That
That's
is a
very
question I
important
would
to
be
us,
glad to
that
address.
if I'm sending the same package from the States, I get to pay a domestic rate. But when I pay it from the Virgin Islands, the same size package, I'm charged international.
I'll be glad to check in and get back to you.
Okay, and Mr. Messina as well. When Amazon.com, you know, we know that letters are becoming decreasing. You've talked about that. And at the same time, there's been an explosion in terms of e-commerce and the amount of e-commerce activity. We have many small businesses in the territory that are trying to utilize the e-commerce to be able to not just have their goods on Amazon or things of that nature, but also to ship in other things. And our consumers as well love using Amazon. Is there a reason why in the U.S. Virgin Islands we are not allowed to have certain things from Amazon, why certain electronics or certain other things are not treated the same, and why the rates that we have for our shipping are very different than anywhere else, even from our neighbor in Puerto Rico?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Plaskett. The question about varying rates is what has been discussed today. And so we as a company and we, our sellers that I'm here talking about, are facing this disparate system that doesn't make any sense. So we're sort of victims of it as well. As to the reason why certain goods can't be shipped to certain places, those are restrictions placed upon us as a business, usually by the manufacturers of certain products. You just can't sell some things into some places. These geographical restrictions exist separate and apart from us. I mean, we want to provide as much convenience and selection as we can to our customers worldwide, including in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
And the shipping rates, is that also restricted by those manufacturers? Is that your rates?
No, neither. They're the rates of the shippers.
Of the shippers?
Correct.
That you've partnered with, correct?
That's correct. We pay a variety of shippers, including 2 at this table and others, to ship things for us worldwide. And we are the...
Which are the 2 at the table? You're talking about
Postal
Federal
Service
Express and the
FedEx.
Postal Service?
Yes.
Okay.
Not the Inspector General.
Oh, I would hope not. I don't know if he has the capacity for that at this time, but you never know. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this. Thank you for the indulgence of... I'll take a little bit of Mr. Clay's time. I know that he went under what he's supposed to.
It's kind of like carryover minutes, huh? All right. I'm going to go ahead and recognize myself for a series of questions, and then we'll go to the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia. And so I'm fascinated, Mr. Reisner. This is a big deal to Amazon, is what you're saying. Is this what I would call non-competitive rates internationally? Is that correct?
It's a big deal for our seller customers, and we were looking out for them. And you know, we're going to be fine in either way. It's just this kind of an imbalance among our seller customers is illogical, and it ends up hurting, as I mentioned, American businesses.
But you're an international company, and so you could potentially benefit greatly from importing products via lower postal rates from China directly into Marion, North Carolina.
Yeah, I look forward to visiting, sir. Amazon has sellers in 100 different countries around the world, and so you're absolutely right that there are these disparities operate even within our Amazon system. But we've seen no need for this as a matter of policy, and the very fact that it is hurting a segment of our seller customers, the American sellers selling to American consumers, is just, it's an imbalance that makes no sense to us, and we're looking out for the entire ecosystem.
Well, it adds real credibility to your testimony, because the potential for you to be harmed, your company, is really at the expense of fairness. So I applaud you in not only being here as a witness, but being willing to speak on behalf of what I see is an unfair system with regards to all U.S. citizens. So, Mr. Fauché, let me come to you. You made a comment earlier that was extremely troubling, because you said, well, we'll listen to all the input of everybody else with one caveat, except if it has a foreign policy implication, I guess. And so you had the foreign policy out. So are you suggesting, is it your testimony, that the American people ought to be paying higher package delivery rates to further the foreign policy as it relates to China?
No, and that was not the intention of my testimony.
Okay, so please clarify for me, because that's what it sounded like, and I want you to clarify it for me, because people in North Carolina or California or wherever, when they start to hear this, they're going to have a real hard time saying, why are we giving China better rates than Virginia or California? I mean, why would you, how can you justify that as fair?
The system is not fair, and that's what we are trying to improve upon and correct, and that's what we've been doing for years, starting, as far as I know, with the 2012 Congress, going into the 2016 and the 2020 Congress. We will work to make this system more fair for the American consumer overall. That means bringing down the costs, or bringing down the, matching the cost of the terminal dues to the cost of providing the service for the international mail that comes into the United States. Now, what I was trying to explain earlier was this process that we use to develop our policies. I was trying to explain that we are not bound 100% by rules and regulations, that we have to take into account the President's prerogatives to form foreign policy. But I didn't mean to indicate in any way that we want to give any kind of favor or favor in any way a Chinese consumer over an American consumer, a Chinese business over an American business. We're in the business at the State Department of promoting American interests, including the American consumers and the American businessmen, and that's what we're going to do.
And Ms. Sparks helped you out because she gave you an ollie oxen free, as I would call it, you know, that you weren't there during the last time that it's negotiating. But now you will be, and now the pressure will be focused on you. And I can assure you that this will not be the last hearing as we look at this, because we're going to look for real results. Go ahead.
Wait, ma'am, first of all, it's not just me. There's a whole team at the State Department and among all these different agencies that'll be working on this issue. And we have our strategic goals that have been agreed upon. We're trying to achieve those. And those goals really are to bring down the costs of this system for the American consumer, the American taxpayer.
Well, Mr. Taub said that he was part of a hearing when he was chief of staff and, you know, here on Capitol Hill, and that, I guess, to quote him, that it's moved at a glacial pace, which I would assume is not very fast. And so are we going to see progress in glacial terms, or are we going to see progress in real terms? When is it going to be more expensive for a Chinese company to ship something from Shanghai to Marion than it is for a U.S. company? When can we expect that? 2018?
I really cannot answer that question. I don't know. I would hope that we'll have the system corrected by then so that the costs reflect the actual costs for shipping those products.
Well, I've asked the committee to go back and get some of the testimony from the last hearings, because I don't want us to be repeating that we would hope that it'll be fixed, and then there's somebody with more gray hair chairing this committee 15 years from now and we not fix the problem, because it has real impact. I'm going to go ahead and recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, my good friend, Ms. Norton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing. It presents new information to me, and I'm getting to understand the complexities, and as I understand it, the State Department, if there's primary authority, would be with the State Department, although they can that agency can coordinate with other agencies like the Postal Service. And of course, I'm particularly interested in the Postal Service in light of this committee's jurisdiction over the Postal Service. Now, I don't know whether this question is for Mr. McAninch. I suppose I should begin with him or Mr. Williams. But let's look at the Post Office. It can make agreements with other countries as well. Isn't that correct? The Postal Service, United States Postal Service, Mr. McAninch.
That's correct, Ms. Norton.
Now, does the current terminal system that we've been discussing here make it more difficult for the Postal Service to engage in, to enter into such agreements? Mr. Williams?
It does, ma'am. With terminal dues at the back of the person that we're negotiating with, all they have to do is stand up from the table, and the matter is settled by reverting all the way back to terminal dues. So it puts the person trying to move toward a fairer agreement in a severe disadvantage, knowing that that all the other party has to do is just stand up, and it's settled very much in their favor.
So then that gets us back to the State Department.
Well, the Universal Postal Union proceedings.
Yes.
Our representative, of course, is the State Department. But it can only be solved there. And as some of the witnesses have said, it's been a very chronic problem. There's been very little progress against this longstanding problem.
So let's look at where there has been some progress with the Postal Service, because apparently there is a Postal Service agreement with China, of all places. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there's been progress on several fronts, both at the UPU and negotiating the bilateral agreements. Now, I would caution that that progress is not getting us to the point of cost coverage, but specifically to answer a question that was posed earlier as to when China would be paying more under the terminal dues structure, that will occur in 2016 when they move from a transition country to a target country, and therefore required to pay a higher rate from a terminal dues perspective. When they're required to do so, the Postal Service could, renegotiate the bilateral discussion with them and ask for higher rates as a result. And as we look toward the Istanbul Congress in 2016, it is our objective to have shape-based costing, country-specific, that I think that my colleagues here would generally agree. The Postal Service is really looking for cost coverage for these inbound items. I think that's universal across this table. So there has been progress. Obviously, unfortunately, sometimes at the pace of the UPU, but we've made progress in Doha, and we're looking to make even more so in Istanbul.
Does the bilateral agreement with China relate only to so-called e-packets? Those are packets that weigh up to 4.4 pounds?
That's the primary foundation.
How come? How come?
That's obviously the volume increase that respective foreign postal operator is looking to provide.
That China is willing to provide?
Correct.
Do you consider this bilateral agreement with respect to e-packets a success?
It's a step in the right direction, but until we reach cost coverage, I would be remiss in claiming anything a success.
But Mr. Taub, you report that the bilateral agreements cause the same distortions as the terminal dues system. If that's so, why is that so?
Yes, two things. One, in context, we have long said and continue to maintain that bilateral and multilateral agreements relative to the UPU terminal due rates are better, but it's relative. The recent report that we had conducted—
Why are they better again?
They're better because the Postal Service itself can have the control to negotiate at a more compensatory rate than the default UPU rate that's available. But our report that you're referencing that we had done last year did observe that similar distortions that are in effect with terminal dues are there with bilaterals, because we have to keep in mind that bilaterals are similar to terminal dues, not open to private operators. So again, these are agreements that the goal should be similar prices for similar services, regardless of country of origin and regardless of whether a public or private operator. These agreements distort that proverbial first mile. Who will I select to ship? Because, for example, FedEx on this table will not be able to be a participant in that type of agreement.
But I thought FedEx, UPS were receiving small packages from China.
I'm just referring to the bilateral agreements themselves in concept, but certainly FedEx can speak to their business.
FedEx, so how is this occurring then, with apparently in large volumes?
We definitely carry packets from China to the United States, but we don't receive any pricing benefits similar to what foreign post offices give each other. So we're in a different pricing regime because we're not.
You lose money?
I'm sorry?
Do you lose money in carrying these e-packets from China to the United States?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question, but I'll be glad to check into it.
Yeah, I'd be very pleased if you would check into that, if you cover your costs. I mean, you've decided to do this on your own, I take it.
Well, we certainly don't, at this point, offer a service similar in terms of the very low prices that China Post charges its own shippers. So, no,
So
we probably don't
you're not
offer one
competitive
directly.
with China Post.
I would say that's correct, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlewoman. I wanted, since I made reference to it, I guess it was in March of 2000 where we had the hearing. And at that particular point, as Mr. Taub can recollect, the State Department said that they wanted the cost covered fully by 2005. So we missed it by at least 10 years. And so are we going to make better progress, Mr. in the coming couple of years? You're the only one at the table that can probably speak to that.
No, I would absolutely hope so. Yeah, I would agree. The pace has been very slow. It could be better, but we're negotiating with 192 other countries and a global framework for all these sorts of things. It's not something that we can just snap our fingers and have it done. We have to work it very carefully and work it very diligently and put all our efforts and resources toward achieving this. It would have been great to have achieved it by 2005. I wish we had achieved it by today, but we're not there yet. But we're going to continue working toward that goal, and hopefully by 2016, 2018, we'll be much more close, if not there.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and recognize and let you off the hook. I'll recognize the ranking member, Mr. Conley, for as much time as he needs.
Is that letting him off the hook, Mr. Chairman? All right. Well, thank you so much. Mr. Foster, you heard Mr. Meisner use the example of a package going from my home county of Fairfax to the chairman's home county of Marion, North Carolina. And that distance is 340 miles, and that would cost $1.94. But a comparable package being shipped from Shanghai, China to Marion, North Carolina, a distance of 7,000 miles, would actually cost 82 cents less. Is there any rhyme or reason for providing that kind of effective subsidy for parcels going back and forth with China in today's day and age?
Okay, I have to, first of all, say I'm not a businessman, so I don't know how these business deals are done between the shippers and the sellers and how they arrive at the rates that the shippers are going to pay. I'm sure there are negotiations among the sellers in China with China Post to figure out what kind of costs they're going to have. What we deal with are the terminal dues, which is the cost the United States agrees to take on for paying for the international postal mail that comes in.
Well, but
and
you're
what
an
you're
official,
suggesting is
right,
absolutely correct. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
We need to increase the terminal dues so that they cover our costs, and that's the goal.
Even aside from the solution, and I agree with you, from a foreign policy point of view, from an economic foreign policy, even if you're not a businessman, it just kind of flies in the face of intuitive sense, given China's, increasing economic development. It is a competitor now. It doesn't need a subsidy, it seems to me, to be engaged in commerce with the United States. And it certainly shouldn't cost less to deliver a package from Shanghai to here than it does for me to send a package to my good friend Mr. Meadows in North Carolina.
I would agree.
Yeah, okay. Anyone disagree? Anyone want to take the stance of China needs more subsidies from the United States? No, great. All right, I didn't think so. Okay, Mr. Williams, terminal dues are meant to cover the cost of inbound international mail, correct? Would you say these fees cover the actual cost of transporting that mail?
No, sir. We lose we lose revenue on every single package that we deliver.
Why is that?
The terminal dues are set below the delivery costs that the Postal Service incurs.
So if I'm reading your last report,
yes, sir,
we've lost over $200 million in the 2010 to 2013 period alone on inbound international single-piece letter post. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. It's $233 million, And if you include the latest figures, 2014, it rises to a cumulative loss of $308 million
308.
between
Now,
2010.
now outbound, though, we're making money. Is that correct? You state in the report that the Postal Service has made just under $900 million in outbound international mail. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And the PRC report states, and I quote, "The fact that terminal dues do not reflect the domestic price for last mile activities," which you already testified, "implies that designated postal operators may lose money on inbound deliveries and earn money on outbound deliveries," which in fact your report documents. Correct?
That is correct. The concern that I think all of us have is that is not that this is a postal issue, but that we're inflicting harm on American commerce.
Right.
Because of all of these anomalies and all of these distortions, we can make or lose money in any given year, but the constant loser is the American businessman and American commerce.
In essence, Americans mailing to foreign countries are subsidizing foreign mailers who send mail to the United States. Would that be a fair statement?
Correct. The American businessmen are paying to be devoured by the Chinese businessmen.
The PRC's report also states that distortion of competition for first mile and last mile activities is an issue caused by the current terminal dues system. Would you agree with that, Ms. Sparks?
Yes, I would.
Has the current system led your company, FedEx, unable to compete for those first and last mile activities?
Certainly at those prices, at that price point, yes.
By the way, while I got you here, Ms. Sparks, does FedEx or do you support the TPA and the underlying TPP? So would that be good for America?
Wow, okay. I wasn't expecting that question.
I just let it hang out there.
I'll give you a clue. You probably ought to answer yes.
I think I'll follow the chairman's lead.
Well, we're dying to hear from business on that subject.
Well, it's an important issue to us, and the answer is yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I know it's a cheap question, but I need allies anywhere I can find them. I'm very lonely these days on my side of the aisle. Let me see. PRC's report also identified distortion of competition between retailers in the domestic market and markets abroad as an issue. Mr. Meisner, you would agree?
Yes, sir. And
could you speak into the mic a little bit?
Mr. Connolly, I'm sorry. Is that,
sorry,
that
no
better?
problem.
And I apologize also for not having a green tie on. So I very much agree with that, and we're seeing.
As long as it's not orange, you're okay.
Yeah, I averaged out somewhere. So we're seeing it on our platform. We're seeing different sellers advantaged, different sellers disadvantaged, and it turns out that those advantaged are overseas and those disadvantaged are domestic.
What do you think the problem is, Mr. Meisner? I mean, is it just that we haven't gotten around to rationalizing this thing?
I think it's part of it. I mean, we've heard today that it's difficult for the postal operators like the USPS to negotiate with, say, a China Post and form a bilateral agreement if the floor set by the UPU is so low. But that's viewing this completely in a vacuum. It seems like we have this much broader relationship with China, that this ought to be on the table as part of it. And so if the State Department is limiting itself only to negotiating in the UPU, we're missing an opportunity to view this more holistically as part of our bilateral relationship with China.
And it also just, I wonder what you think, and Mr. Faucher, from the State Department point of view, if you got one, but sometimes with the best of intentions, we do things to help lift up a country so that it can improve its economic status and income and the quality of lives of the folks there. I mean, it's one thing to help a Burkina Faso today, not to pick on somebody. It's quite another to decide China still needs the same kind of help. And what strikes me about this is we haven't kind of reevaluated the change. China is, you know, when I was growing up, we still had famines in China. We've come a long way, you know, from that. And does our policy, in this case, the fees we set, reflect that reality, that change? And some of me thinks that it's almost inertia that we haven't gotten around to it. It's not some, obviously, we don't have some dark conspiratorial plan to help China beat America in competition, but here is something that seems to me counterproductive, and there's no reason China can't pay the same going freight as anybody else. Fair enough, Mr. Faucher, from a State Department point of view?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, there's a major difference between Burkina Faso and China as it exists today, but there has been change, and I want to point that out. China is moving from the transitional target phase to the target phase, so its rates will be going up, reflecting its greater economic power. There was also an agreement negotiated by USPS with China, also reflecting China's commercial power.
Mr. Meisner's shaking his head. Mr. Meisner.
I'm sorry, Mr. Connolly.
That's all right.
That's correct. There is going to be this transition of group to another group, but it will not affect the rates, the terminal dues rates here in the United States. That alone is not sufficient to change the rates.
And I think that that's the key.
Yeah.
And if you want to disagree with that, I'll give you equal time. I would caution you because I think the facts would speak otherwise. I think they would agree with Mr. Meisner, because my question to you is—
And Ms. Sparks was also shaking her head.
Yeah, I mean, because what we have is they're transitional right now. And my question is, transitional to what? I mean, to #1 in the world? I mean, it's, you know, we've got to look at this from a standpoint of real rates based on real cost and based on the fact that China is an economic power, without a doubt. I think anybody who studies it would see that. And so transitioning them in terms of where they are categorized and the rates must reflect that transition. And what we're led to believe at this point is that would be very minor in terms of the rate difference, even by coming out of that. Would you disagree with that?
No, I really wouldn't disagree with anything you said, other than to point out that there will be an increase, as I understand it, and I could be corrected here, in the terminal dues rate that will be charged to China once they transition to the target group. And that basically we're seeing a trend line here where we're getting closer, but not quite there, and not by a long shot, to covering the costs with China. It's moving downward rather than, it's not widening, it's narrowing, is what I would say.
All right,
Mr. Chairman, I know I just want to give Mr. Taub a chance to clarify, because he actually had a lot of experience with this fee setting and so forth. Did you want to have a comment? And then I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think everything that everyone's addressed is A-okay. I have nothing to add on that unless there is something specific.
Lord Almighty, he's ready to be in the State Department. Hire him, Mr. Fauci.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Thanks much. Ms. Sparks, just to kind of set it up, do you think we are effectively advocating for our position or are we effectively advocating for our interests at UPU?
Well, you know, as a Midwesterner, Wisconsin, right?
Correct.
My son just moved there. Nice state.
Oh, good for him.
I think the proof's in the pudding, and we haven't gotten there yet. It is a very difficult atmosphere to operate in because it is a one country, one vote. But the United States needs to continue to push very hard for cost-based rates. And I think that historically we have sort of thrown up our hands in the past. I think that there are European countries that are experiencing some of the same problems. I think that there are coalitions that could be made, but this takes time and resources, which is why in our written testimony we advocated a special task force be formed among government agencies to talk about how this could better be approached. Get the U.S. Trade Representative in there. They're good at negotiating. Get the Department of Commerce in there to represent the interests of small businesses. I think that there are some things that can be done to help the State Department and to bolster their fact bases and their positions.
Okay. Mr. Fouché, in 2016, when the next Congress, Universal Postal Union Congress meets, how do you plan on doing a better job of negotiating?
Of negotiating, or?
Well, of pushing for our national interest. I mean, to get a better deal, what are your plans next time around?
Well, there are several initiatives, at least 2 initiatives on terminal dues that we are supporting, which we hope will improve the system, refine it, make it better. Won't completely solve it, but we'll continue to push that way. We'll push for a work program for the Postal Operations Council so that in the following cycle after the next Congress, it will be forced to look at these issues much more closely and make progress on them along the lines that we've been discussing today.
Okay. I'll give another one to Ms. Sparks. We're 40% of the world's mail volume. Are other countries, you think, looking for us to take a leadership role and change some of this stuff?
There's no question in my mind. Other countries are looking for us to be a leader here. At the last UPU Congress, there was a resolution introduced to do a study similar to what Mr. Fauché is talking about, and that was championed by the Nordic countries, and it was finally withdrawn for lack of support. And if I remember correctly, the United States was not out there strongly advocating for that particular amendment. I'm glad to hear that we would be doing something like that in this Congress.
Do you think in the past we really haven't been, say, aggressive enough, or really we haven't taken the leadership role that some people are expecting us to take? Is that accurate, you think?
I hate to say we lack aggression, but I think that
I'm sure you don't. Yeah, right.
Pardon?
I'm sure you don't, but go ahead.
I think we could be stronger advocates for cost-based pricing, for transparent treatment of mailers, and for, as Mr. Taub said, similar prices for similar services. That's not the tradition of the UPU. The tradition of the UPU is that the haves pay the have-nots. What's brought this problem to a head is the have-nots suddenly have a lot.
Okay. One more question for you. Or is my time up? Okay. I think about a year ago, Alibaba bought 10% of the Singapore Post. Okay. And I think as the result of that, and due to the convention, USPS is really subsidizing Alibaba to compete with American companies. Do you think this might be the beginning of a trend?
Well, I hope not.
I mean,
What we do see, though, that that companies with strong ties to transition countries or countries that have much lower terminal dues rates for shipments to the United States are better advantaged. They're better positioned to take advantage of these disparities. I don't know what the stake in Singapore Post will do for them, but it doesn't make sense that as a postal operator, partly owned now by a private company, that these subsidies would end up in the hands of a foreign private company. That makes as little sense as the underlying structure.
So it's not possible this would happen again?
I don't see why it wouldn't be possible.
Could be possible, right?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for indulging me for an extra half minute.
I thank the gentleman. I thank each of you for your responses, and I want to close with this. Mr. Mechanic, do you reimburse the State Department for representation cost as it relates to negotiating this? Does the Postal Service do that?
Yes, the Postal Service, under an interagency agreement, reimburses the State Department a nominal amount for...
and what is that amount?
Approximately $150,000 a year for administrative costs.
So you actually pay him to represent you in negotiating? In a generic sense. Obviously, it's not him personally.
Yes, by the 1999 omnibus appropriations, we are required to reimburse the State Department, and it varies based upon the level of engagement.
So, Ms. Sparks, does that create a competitive disadvantage for you?
I think it certainly creates the appearance of a conflict, and we think that it actually stems from a historical anomaly when that representation was first assigned to the State Department. We think that that could easily be gotten rid of in a future appropriations bill by just lining out that item.
Mr. Fauché, I'm to put you on the spot, but I'll do it in a nice way, hopefully, is you would never want to have the appearance of a conflict of interest, would you? It's a softball question.
No.
Okay. So in that, you would certainly support getting rid of this reimbursement that would come from the Postal Service to you for representation. You would support legislation to that effect if it came in a bipartisan manner from Mr. Conley and I.
Yeah, I think we would support continuing receiving the amount that we receive so that we can carry out our function under the law.
So you wouldn't support
source of it-
legislation to do away with that?
The source of it is up to Congress, basically.
But I'm saying, if we
Right.
put it forward, you wouldn't be pushing back from the State Department and said, no, we really want that money to come in from the Postal Service?
I can't imagine why we would do that.
Okay, I would hope that that would be the answer. So I'm going to say thank each of you for your willingness to participate. I've tried to keep part of this jovial, and yet at the same time, it's a very serious matter that the American people would not understand. I don't understand. Mr. Conley and I were just talking. We don't understand it. And the message needs to be clear at the State Department that if there is a foreign policy reason for it, we want to know what the compelling foreign policy reason would be, not just generically, but why is it so compelling that the American people should be subsidizing foreign package and postal rates from someone who, as Ms. Sparks so eloquently put it, they were the have-nots, now they are the haves. And so with that, I'd like to thank all of you, and if there's no further business before the committee, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.